They say it began with a whisper, not in the Senate, not among soldiers, but in the marble halls of the Villa Crassi, where torches burned brighter than the stars outside. A whisper not of fear, but of gold. A prophecy disguised as flattery. A servant, perhaps, or a slave pausing as he dusted the edge of a statue, muttering, "He could buy Rome itself and still hunger." No one remembered his face, but the words lingered. Marcus Licinius Crassus was no ordinary man. He had turned the ashes of Rome into his empire. When fires gutted the tenements, it was Crassus's men who appeared not with water, but with contracts. He bought the ruins for pennies, rebuilt them, and sold them back to the desperate. He owned marble quarries, silver mines, entire fire brigades, and even senators whose loyalty he purchased with silent generosity. He made a business of disaster, and Rome loved him for it or feared him, which to Crassus was the same thing. He had crushed the rebellion of Spartacus with cold efficiency. 50,000 crucified slaves lined the Appian Way, and Crassus rode through them like a man immune to pity. It should have sealed his name in eternity, but it didn't. The crowds still roared louder for Pompey. The statues still bore Caesar's face. And that was unbearable. By the time Crassus had reached his 60s, his wealth rivaled kingdoms. His name was etched into every crevice of power but glory. The kind that outlives flesh and coin eluded him. In Rome, to die rich was not enough. One had to die remembered. And so the seed was planted, Parthia, a land of silk and arches, a name spoken with awe and disdain, not yet conquered by Rome, not even touched. To Crassus, it was more than a military target. It was a mirror. Conquer it, and he would be more than rich. He would be immortal, greater than Caesar even. He would no longer be the third name in the triumvirate. He would be the first. But the omens turned restless. A priest's sacrificial animal revealed malformed entrails, its liver shriveled and blackened like old iron. The augurs warned him. His wife's dreams were filled with blood and sand. A storm split the temple roof the night he offered vows to Jupiter, and yet Crassus, dignified in his purple-bordered toga, smiled. "Gold will silence the gods," he said. It was not hubris in the theatrical sense. Crassus was not a fool. He was a man who had spent a lifetime calculating risk. He believed in numbers, in contracts, in leverage. He had built Rome's richest fortune by turning chaos into profit. To him, gods were just another kind of debtor, owed coin, not devotion. The Senate protested. They reminded him that the Parthians were not pirates nor rebels, but an empire cunning and deeply rooted. Crassus waved them off. He had the legions. He had the coin to pay them. He would carve a new province out of eastern dust, and Rome would finally bow to his name. As winter lifted from the Tiber, and the clouds scattered across the Alban hills, Crassus stood on the field of Mars, inspecting the troops he had gathered. They cheered for him not out of love, but out of hope. His campaign promised wealth, land, and plunder. And Crassus, ever the merchant, promised returns. But behind him, behind the standards, a crow landed on the helmet of a statue. It pecked once, twice, and then flew. The soldiers muttered. Crassus did not turn. Power can decay in many forms, but few downfalls are as symbolic as gruesome as the collapse of Marcus Licinius Crassus. For a man who once built Rome from its own ruin, who turned fire into fortune, his final defeat would not come from a rival's blade, but from a cup of molten gold. And as we walk into the blistering sands of Mesopotamia, in the spring of 53 BCE, we follow not just a general, but a man chasing immortality with dry lips and a burning throat. This is not merely a story of death. It is a story of hunger, the kind no wealth can cure, and the silence that gold cannot fill. Not even Marcus Crassus, the richest man in Roman history, could escape the oldest truth of all: he who swallows the world must someday choke. They gathered in secret rooms lit by oil lamps and ambition. Whispers of empire turned to promises. Men in senatorial robes leaned closer, weighing risk against reward. But one voice rose above them all, steady, measured, utterly convinced. Crassus did not beg. He negotiated. That was his art. When he spoke of Parthia, he did not describe terrain or tactics. He spoke in terms of return. It would be a short campaign, swift, clean. Rome would gain a new province, he a new identity. For too long his triumphs had been measured in coin, while Caesar claimed Gaul and Pompey the East. Parthia would be his canvas of blood. But Rome had not sanctioned this war. It was a private hunger, masquerading as national interest. The Senate did not officially declare it. There was no clear provocation, and yet Crassus forged ahead, invoking the triumvirate's quiet agreement, an uneasy alliance between Pompey Caesar and himself. A three-headed monster barely held together by shared power and mutual suspicion. Caesar was busy with the Celts, Pompey content with his estates and fading popularity. Crassus saw the moment, a window where neither rival could challenge him. If he returned victorious, the balance would shift. The spark was struck in the Forum when Crassus made a rare public appearance. He stood before the people and announced the campaign. His voice echoed over the stone, not as a soldier's call, but as a banker's guarantee. "Parthia holds wealth greater than Alexandria," he said. "Let Rome reclaim what it should own." The crowds drunk on old imperial glory cheered, but the wiser men in togas said nothing. They had seen ambition dressed as patriotism before. His son Publius stood by him, young, handsome, forged in Caesar's army blood, still hot with the taste of his own small triumphs. He would ride at his father's side. Together, they would carve their names into the bones of the East. Fathers and sons joined them. Promises of land, women's spoils beyond imagining. Rome had always moved eastward when it hungered, and so they marched 40,000 men, 6 legions strong, crossing the Euphrates, like Caesar had crossed the Rubicon, with purpose, but not enough fear. It was not long before the land itself resisted. The Mesopotamian plains were wide and flat, no hills, no cover. The sun rose like a blade and cut through flesh. Supplies dwindled, scouts vanished. The locals offered maps that led to mirages, but Crassus pushed on. He had ignored Artavasdes, the Armenian king who had offered safe passage through mountain paths. Crassus had refused too slow, too cautious, not glorious enough. He wanted spectacle. He wanted open battle watched by the gods and Rome alike. He wanted a victory so undeniable it would turn Pompey to dust and Caesar to shadow. And then they saw them. Parthian riders on the horizon, small, swift, dressed in silk and steel, their faces veiled in dust. They did not charge. They circled, watched, dissolved into the heat like mirages. Crassus smiled. "Cowards," he muttered, "they fear us." He did not know Surena. The Parthian general was young, but patient, a master of tactics alien to Roman doctrine. He did not seek glorious confrontation. He sought erosion. His archers rode in silence, their quivers deep as the desert. They would not fight on Roman terms. Crassus ordered the march to continue. No one questioned him, not publicly. But even Publius at night looked toward the east and said nothing. The men grumbled. Their sandals cracked. Their tongues dried. Crassus promised water ahead, honor ahead, wealth ahead. But what lay ahead was Carrhae, a name not yet cursed, a place not yet haunted, but already waiting. The die was cast not with boldness, but with blindness, and Crassus, holding the dice, did not even glance at the throw. He believed in destiny. But destiny, like gold, melts quickly in fire, Carrhae. The name would come to stain Roman history like blood in white linen, but when Crassus reached its outskirts, it was nothing but a minor town flat, exposed, barely fortified. A place to rest, not to fight. Yet by then rest was a lie. The legions arrived weary, their feet cracked from the heat. They were men built for shields and discipline, not for sand that swallowed boots or winds that whispered like ghosts. Crassus stationed them there, expecting the enemy to approach in Roman fashion, foot soldiers in tight ranks, blades glinting in sunlight, banners flying. Instead, silence greeted him. Then came the sound, not of horns or war cries, but of drums deep and relentless like thunder inside the chest. Then the hoofbeats. Hundreds, thousands. The Parthians emerged from the shimmering horizon, not in mass formation, but in waves of mounted archers. Their armor was foreign and glinting, almost ceremonial, but their arrows were exact. They moved like smoke. They did not stop. Crassus ordered a square formation, the Roman testudo, the tortoise shell of war. It was his strength, his pride. It had broken Spartacus. It had quelled the East. But against Surena's cavalry it was a tomb. The arrows came not in a burst, but in a rain, endless, precise, agonizing. Shields became pincushions. Helmets rang with the screams of iron. Water ran out, blood replaced it. Still Crassus stood firm. He believed this was a storm to outlast. But he underestimated Surena's cruelty and his patience. Then came the true wound, not from the enemy, but from loss. Publius, Crassus's son, had led a charge of cavalry to flank the Parthians. A bold move, foolish perhaps, but bold. The legionaries had cheered him as he rode out, his hair tied back, like a young Alexander, eyes blazing with that Roman thirst for legacy. Surena waited. The Parthians opened their ranks and encircled him. A beautiful trap, no noise, no rage, just closing silence. His cavalry was isolated, then annihilated. Later, the severed head of Publius was paraded on a spear. Crassus saw it from the front lines. There was no scream, no collapse. The richest man in Rome simply stopped. His voice did not rise again for hours. Something in him cracked, not like marble, but like clay, silently, imperceptibly. The men saw it. His officers saw it. The Parthians certainly saw it. Doubt crept in, quiet, slow like sand, into the joints of armor. At night, the drums never ceased. The Parthians taunted in Greek and Persian, calling Crassus a coward, a merchant, a father of ash. His own men whispered too now. Not of revolt, not yet, but of abandonment. Had they been sold for glory, rain did not fall, food rotted, arrows never stopped. Then Surena changed tactics again. He retreated just enough to seem weak to bait movement. Crassus fell for it. He abandoned Carrhae. He moved his legions deeper into the plain, chasing what he thought was retreat. It was desperation now, not strategy. He needed something, anything, to recover honor, to distract from the image of his son's dead eyes. But it was all part of the Parthian theatre. Surena struck again, this time harder. Roman formations collapsed inward. Men trampled each other. Centurions shouted and were cut down mid-command. One cohort broke formation and fled. Others followed. There was no glory now, only exhaustion and fear. Crassus's lieutenants begged him to retreat, to turn back across the Euphrates. He refused, not because he was brave, but because he knew what awaited him in Rome. if he returned in disgrace. Death in the desert or humiliation in the Senate. He chose to stand, but the noose had already closed. It was invisible, made not of rope but of dust, fear and gold-shaped illusions. And now it began to tighten. The wind that swept over the plain in the days after Carrhae was dry, hollow, and utterly indifferent. It carried no answers, only the distant clatter of hooves and the smell of death rotting under the sun. The Roman legions, once a machine of conquest, now moved like a wounded beast, slow, confused, divided. Crassus no longer led from strength. He led from necessity. His officers bickered in hushed voices. Some pleaded to retreat toward Armenia. Others proposed surrender. But Crassus, whose pride had built cities and buried rebellions, could not imagine negotiating with a man he had once called a barbarian prince. Then came the offer. A message delivered on an arrow shaft. General Serena wishes to parley. Terms of peace could be arranged. Safe passage home, a gesture of civility. It felt impossible, too generous, but also too tempting. The legions were dying. The desert was not kind, and neither was Rome to failures. Crassus's soldiers begged him to accept. One even knelt at his feet, voice cracking, "If you will not save yourself, then save us." And so Crassus agreed. At the banks of the Balissus River, under a sky split by cruel sun, Crassus rode out with a few senior commanders. No armor, no helmet, just a crimson cloak stained by days of sweat and grief. The Parthians approached slowly, dust rising in rings behind their horses. Serena was at the center, tall, elegant, glittering with ornaments. A general who looked more like a performer. But Crassus recognized something far more dangerous behind the theatrical robe's control. Total, deliberate control. The two men met between armies. There were no thrones, no banners, no scrolls. Serena spoke through an interpreter, gracious, smiling, almost apologetic. He offered peace. He praised Crassus's name. He lamented the bloodshed. But then, something changed. The Parthians claimed the treaty required Crassus himself to come to their camp and sign it as a formal gesture, as a Roman pledge. Crassus hesitated. His officers objected immediately. It was not Roman custom. It was not safe. The tension fractured like glass. Voices rose. Serena's men grew agitated. Their horses stamped and circled. Crassus turned, and in that moment, chaos. One of the Roman officers struck a Parthian with his scabbard. Horses shrieked. Blades flashed. The guards surged. Crassus's men were overwhelmed in seconds. Swords drawn. Throats cut, bodies falling into the dust. Crassus was seized. Not killed. Not yet. The Parthians pulled him from his saddle and dragged him toward their ranks. His robe torn, his ring ripped from his hand, his sandals lost in the scuffle. The Roman legions, watching from afar, did not move. They did not charge. They did not fight. They simply watched their general disappear. And in that instant, Rome lost something more than a battle. They lost the illusion that they could not be humiliated. The Parthians had done what no power had done before, captured a Roman consul alive. Not just any consul, but one of the three rulers of the Republic. A man whose name had once bought loyalty, now reduced to spoils. Crassus's officers, who survived, attempted to flee, some back to Carrhae, others toward Armenia. Many were hunted down. The rest were never seen again. There would be no rescue, no negotiation, no ransom. For Crassus, there was no more strategy left. No more speeches, no more wealth to bargain with, no more sons to avenge. The decision to meet Serena, the last decision he would ever make freely, had sealed everything. The door had closed behind him, and beyond it, only fire. He was no longer a general, no longer a consul, not even a man in the eyes of those who held him. Marcus Licinius Crassus was now a symbol, but not of triumph, not of Rome, not even of empire. He was a vessel of mockery, a breathing monument to arrogance. And before the dawn would take him, they would strip him of everything, layer by layer, until not even memory could protect him. They did not imprison him in a cell. That would have granted dignity. Instead, they tethered him like a captured beast inside a Parthian command tent. Not bound by ropes, no Serena understood the art of humiliation. Crassus was guarded by silence, watched by men who smiled too long, who said nothing, and yet said everything with their eyes. He was left sitting hours on end with no food, no water, no demands. Just waiting. Around him, celebration. Wine spilled onto the carpets. Musicians played pipes and lutes in a language he didn't speak. Dancers twirled in gold thread. And outside, trophies of war were laid out for display. Roman standards shattered gladii pieces of armor painted in Roman blood. But the cruelest artifact of all stood just beyond the tent flap. His son's helmet bent and cracked, nailed to a spear. Crassus sat motionless. He had seen death. He had delivered it. But this was erasure, the kind of death that begins before the body is taken. He had not wept for Publius. He could not. The tears remained locked somewhere behind his ribs, like coins buried beneath the foundation of a house long burned. The air in the tent was thick with incense, not the kind burned in Roman temples, but something heavier, darker, spiced with foreign sweetness and rot. It clung to his nostrils, made each breath a reminder that he was not home, that he would never be home again. Serena visited only once that night. He did not speak Latin, he merely stared. And then slowly, he ordered the tent flaps opened. Torchlight bathed the tent. Soldiers formed a circle outside, hundreds of them surrounding a central platform. Laid upon it were gold vessels, molten coals, and a large crucible suspended over flame. Crassus understood then, not the details but the intent. This was not execution. This was message. What was about to happen had been planned long before he was captured, perhaps even before he crossed the Euphrates. Serena had not simply defeated Rome, he had prepared a ritual. A soldier approached and set a goblet of water at Crassus's feet. It was not mercy, it was theatre. Crassus reached for it. His hand trembled. As his fingers brushed the metal, he saw his reflection in its surface, distorted, withered ash grey from dust. He looked older than his 60 years. His mouth was cracked, lips dry. A man made of parchment and grief. He did not drink. Instead, he whispered, perhaps to the gods, perhaps to Rome, perhaps to no one. There were no priests, no rites, no final absolution, only memory. He saw his villa, the atrium, where he had once paced with maps and scrolls, the colonnades where he held court over senators and merchants alike, the banquet halls where peacocks had been roasted whole for guests who wore perfume on their sandals. He saw his slaves, thousands of them, silent and unseen. He saw the crosses, all 50,000 lining the Appian Way. He saw gold, endless gleaming molten. He closed his eyes. And in the final darkness before dawn, the richest man in Rome realized he had built his entire legacy on sand and ash. The gold would not save him. The gods would not save him. Even memory had abandoned him. There was nothing left to cling to, only the sound of iron being poured into fire. The sun rose slowly over the Parthian camp, stretching its long fingers across the plain, as if reluctant to witness what was to come. The wind carried no birdsong, only the dry hiss of sand brushing metal and the rhythmic clatter of preparations. A stage was being set. Crassus, dragged from the tent without ceremony, blinked against the glare. The night had stripped him of thought. His mind floated above him, now observing the body below, ragged, limping, coated in dust and humiliation. There was no resistance left, not in his limbs, not in his voice. Only breath remained. And even that seemed borrowed. He was dressed not in rags, but in something worse imitation. His captors had adorned him in Roman general's garb, a toga dyed with false purple, a golden sash sandals wrapped too tightly, mocking the dignity he once commanded. The garments did not fit. They sagged, bunched, tugged at his skin like a lie everyone could see. Then came the crown. It was no laurel. It was a circlet of hammered bronze, dull and unshapely, painted over with flakes of gold leaf. They placed it on his head, like a jest, a parody of triumph. The soldiers laughed, not cruelly, not wildly. It was a quiet, suffocating laughter, like the last gasp of a dying empire, echoing across unfamiliar soil. A procession formed, not to honour, but to perform. Crassus was paraded through the Parthian ranks, the way Roman generals once led chained kings through the streets of Rome in triumphal marches. Only now the positions were reversed. The torches burned for his humiliation. The banners waved not with pride, but derision. At the centre of the camp stood the platform, low, circular, covered in silken cloth. Upon it, a golden statue of a Roman eagle crafted by Parthian hands, its eyes made of glass. At its feet, a brazier burning white-hot. Above it, a cauldron of molten gold. It shimmered thick and gleaming, moving with the slow lethality of lava. The heat radiated outward like a second sun. The smell was impossible to describe, metallic, sweet, nauseating. It filled the nostrils like poison. Serena stepped forward, his garments flowing, his voice calm. He did not address Crassus directly. He addressed the crowd in Greek, in Parthian, in the language of spectacle. He spoke of justice, of arrogance punished, of the folly of Roman greed. And then, with a theatrical sweep of his arm, he gestured toward Crassus. The soldiers held him in place. He did not struggle. There was no escape, and he knew it. Escape was for soldiers. He was now a lesson. Serena turned and approached the cauldron. A golden ladle, long-handled and ceremonial, was plunged into the liquid. It sizzled as it moved, the gold sticking and stretching like honey. The air shimmered around it. Two soldiers forced Crassus's mouth open. He tried to breathe through his nose. The ladle rose. A single line of gold began to pour, slow, deliberate glowing. It touched his lips. He jerked. His jaw clenched, but they forced it wider. The molten stream slipped past his teeth. The scream, if it ever formed, never escaped. His throat was scorched. His tongue ignited. The gold invaded like fire that could not be quenched, clinging to flesh, fusing to bone. His eyes bulged, then emptied. His limbs spasmed, then stilled. A hiss of steam curled upward, whispering into the desert sky. The richest man in Rome had been fed the very thing he worshipped. It was not execution. It was judgment. And all Rome could do when they heard of it weeks later was listen in stunned silence as the East delivered its verdict upon the West, and gold finally consumed the soul of a man who believed it could buy immortality. The Parthians did not bury him. They did not even leave his body whole. After the execution, after the last curl of smoke from his scorched mouth vanished into the dawn sky, they carried what remained of Marcus Licinius Crassus, not with reverence, but as prop, paraded through the ranks with grim delight like a carcass at a hunter's feast. His face had twisted in death, locked in an expression not of fear but of confusion, as if even in his final breath he still did not understand that power, once absolute, could be rendered meaningless in a single cup of molten gold. They decapitated him cleanly, not for malice, but for performance. The head was wrapped in silk and sent east a trophy for the Parthian court. But the story did not end in the sands of Carrhae. It was only beginning. For in the theatre of power, death is merely the final scene of the man. The legend continues. In Ecbatana, the capital of Parthia, Crassus's head was brought to a royal banquet. King Orodes II was hosting a marriage feast. His son Pacorus had just been wed to the daughter of Artavasdes, king of Armenia. Music played, wine flowed. The tables groaned under lamb dates and saffron. And then Serena entered. He held the severed head aloft like an offering. The music stopped. The laughter faded. And then someone laughed again. A Greek actor present to perform that night's tragedy. The Bacchae, by Euripides, stepped forward and in a moment that would haunt Roman pride for generations, used Crassus's head as a stand-in for the severed head of Pentheus, the king torn apart for defying Dionysus. The audience howled. The death of Crassus became not only execution, not only punishment, but comedy, a punchline in a foreign play. Rome's richest citizen reduced to a prop in a farce written centuries before his birth. Back at Carrhae, the remains of his army suffered a slower, quieter death. Thousands of legionaries, abandoned leaderless, terrified, were captured or executed. The survivors were marched eastward in chains, vanished into the borders of Persia and Bactria, where some would serve as border guards for foreign kings never to return. Ghosts in enemy lands, Romans only in memory. Of the 40,000 who marched with Crassus, fewer than 10,000 returned. When the first trembling survivors reached Roman soil, they carried no standards, no gold, no honor. Only silence. The Senate did not offer public mourning. No state funeral, no statue. Even his enemies in the triumvirate Caesar and Pompey offered no condolences. Privately, they may have smiled. Rome, the eternal city, moved on. But something had shifted. The death of Crassus shattered more than a man. It shattered the delicate balance of Rome's ruling trio. With Crassus gone, the weight of rivalry fell fully between Pompey and Caesar. And soon that tension would erupt into civil war, a war that would consume the Republic itself. But history would not forget Carrhae. In the East, Crassus became legend not as a conqueror, but as a cautionary tale. A man so consumed by greed, he drowned in it. A general so desperate for glory, he mistook gold for greatness. His name would be remembered not alongside Caesar and Pompey as he had hoped, but as a memento mori, a whisper on every battlefield where ambition threatened to outpace wisdom. There, in the shifting desert sands, under a sky that offered no mercy, the final illusion died. Gold is heavy, but it cannot carry the weight of empire. The sands of Carrhae buried more than bodies. They buried certainty. For centuries, Rome had believed itself invincible, not merely powerful, but ordained. Its generals were gods in motion, its armies the will of civilization itself. But with Crassus's death, a new truth emerged from the dust. Rome could bleed. Rome could be mocked. Rome could fail. The eastern winds carried the story faster than the survivors. In every forum, every bathhouse, every tavern along the Via Appia, whispers grew of betrayal, of horror, of molten gold, poured not just into a man's throat, but into the throat of Roman arrogance itself. And though no monument was ever erected to Crassus, no arch carved in his name, he became immortal in another way. Through caution, through fear, through the shame that lingered in Rome's memory like smoke after a fire. The Senate, ever opportunistic, erased him quietly. No speeches, no mourning. His estates were divided, his name softened by silence. His family disgraced, vanished into political shadows. The house of Crassus, once synonymous with wealth and influence, fell like an empire built on sand. But the ripple was far wider than lineage. Crassus had been the balancing weight in Rome's uneasy triumvirate. With him gone, the scale tipped violently. Pompey, now unchecked in the capital, grew increasingly suspicious of Caesar, whose victories in Gaul only inflated his legend. Without Crassus's money and manipulations to broker peace, the inevitable exploded. Caesar crossed the Rubicon. Civil war ignited. The Republic began its final unraveling. Carrhae had not just ended a life, it had detonated an era. And yet in death, Crassus achieved something he never could in life. He became a lesson. Historians would write of him not as a statesman or a hero, but as a warning etched in blood and metal. Cicero, with bitter irony, would note that Crassus had long hungered for gold and was finally satisfied. Later thinkers, Christian and pagan alike, pointed to his end as divine punishment for hubris. The man who bought influence, who crushed rebellion, who bent fire to his will in the end, could not control his own fate. He had everything except restraint. And still beneath the tragedy, beneath the mockery, one cannot help but find the glint of something deeper resolve. Crassus did not flee. He did not beg. He met Serena's deceit with upright spine, even when trembling. He looked into the face of death not as a man prepared, but as a man unwilling to yield. There is a kind of courage in that, however misguided, the courage of one who believes too much in his own myth. Rome would go on to avenge Carrhae in time, though never fully. The Parthian border remained a scar. Decades later, Augustus would retrieve the captured standards, treating their return like the recovery of a limb. But no general ever truly erased the memory of Crassus's fall. The East had proved it could humiliate the West, not with numbers, but with elegance, with intelligence, with symbolism so precise it burned deeper than the gold they poured. And in that wound, something darker took root in Roman identity paranoia. The belief that every victory might be temporary, that every general might end as Crassus did, defeated not just in battle, but in meaning. To this day, the name Crassus does not conjure triumph. It conjures ruin. The man who owned more land than any other Roman. The man who financed empires. The man who silenced cities with fire and gold. Silenced in turn by a silence even heavier, that of being remembered not for greatness, but for how terribly it ended. And so we are left with a single image, not of the man, but of the ladle, the gold, the open mouth, and the terrible silence that followed. Let every empire remember the appetite for immortality often ends not with applause, but with ash.